poor orphan girl dances in the street, her talent leaves everyone in awe. The streets of San Espino were alive with noise and movement, a symphony of clattering carts, shouting vendors, and the occasional echo of laughter. In the midst of the chaos, a small girl darted between the crowds, her bare feet kicking up dust. Her name was Maria, and at just 10 years old, she had learned to navigate the bustling city with the cunning of someone much older. Maria's world was the streets. She had no family, no home, only the tattered dress on her back and a spirit that refused to be broken. Each day was a struggle to survive, scavenging scraps of food, doing odd jobs for merchants, or simply relying on her wit to get by. But Maria had something else, something that kept her going even on the hardest days: a love for dancing. Ever since she was little, Maria had been captivated by the performers who graced the streets of San Espino. Musicians, jugglers, fire eaters, they all held a certain magic, but it was the dancers who truly stole her heart. She would watch them from the shadows, her dark eyes wide with wonder as they spun and leapt with effortless grace. When the performers moved on, Maria would find an empty corner and mimic their movements, her small frame swaying and twirling to an imaginary rhythm. She danced not for an audience, but for herself, for the joy it brought her and the escape it offered from her harsh reality. One morning, as the sun climbed above the rooftops, Maria found herself lingering near a street corner where a musician was playing a lively tune on his accordion. A small crowd had gathered to watch, clapping along to the rhythm. Maria's fingers tapped against her leg as she listened, her body itching to move. She glanced around, her heart pounding. She knew the risks of drawing attention to herself. Shopkeepers were quick to chase off anyone they saw as a nuisance, and Maria had been on the receiving end of more than one scolding. But the music was calling to her, and she couldn't resist. Taking a deep breath, Maria stepped into the open space near the musician. At first, she moved cautiously, her feet shuffling in time with the beat. But as the music swelled, so did her confidence. She began to spin, her arms outstretched, her movements fluid and full of life. The crowd's attention shifted to her, murmurs of surprise rippling through the onlookers. Maria didn't notice. She was lost in the dance, her body moving as if the music were coursing through her veins. Her dusty dress fluttered as she twirled, and for a moment, the hardships of her life melted away. When the song ended, Maria stopped abruptly, breathing hard. She looked up to see the crowd staring at her, their expressions a mix of amazement and curiosity. A few people clapped hesitantly, and Maria felt a flicker of pride, until a voice cut through the applause. "Hey, get out of here!" Maria turned to see a shopkeeper storming toward her, his face red with anger. He was a large man with a booming voice, and Maria had had run-ins with him before. "You're scaring off my customers," he barked. "Go beg somewhere else." The crowd began to disperse, and Maria's brief moment of joy evaporated. She backed away, her shoulders hunched as the shopkeeper continued to shout at her. The musician gave her an apologetic glance before packing up his accordion and leaving. Maria ran until she found a quiet alley, her chest heaving as she fought back tears. She crouched against the wall, hugging her knees to her chest. Why had she thought it would be any different this time? The streets were no place for dreams, they were for survival, and survival alone. But Maria couldn't stop dancing. Over the next few days, she returned to the same street corner, waiting until the shopkeeper was distracted before stepping into the open. Each time, she danced for a few fleeting moments before being chased away. And each time, the crowd grew a little larger, their applause a little louder. One afternoon, as Maria twirled to the sound of a nearby violinist, she noticed a woman watching her from across the street. The woman was dressed in fine clothes, her hair neatly styled, and her sharp eyes seemed to take in every movement. Maria felt a flicker of unease but continued to dance, determined to finish what she had started. When the music ended, the woman approached her, a small smile on her lips. "You're very talented," she said, her voice warm but commanding. "What's your name?" Maria hesitated, unsure of what to say. "Maria," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman nodded. "I'm Isabella Marquez," she said. "I run the Marquez Academy of Dance. Have you heard of it?" Maria shook her head, though the name sounded vaguely familiar. Isabella studied her for a moment, then said, "You have a gift, Maria. A raw, natural talent. Have you ever thought about taking lessons?" Maria blinked, her mind racing. Lessons? At an academy? The idea seemed absurd. She was an orphan, a street girl. She didn't belong in a place like that. "I can't," she said quickly. "I don't have money." Isabella's smile softened. "I'm not asking for money," she said. "I'm offering you an opportunity. Come to the academy tomorrow afternoon. Let me see what you can do." Maria stared at her, unsure whether to trust her. But the woman's gaze was steady, her tone sincere. "Think about it," Isabella said, handing her a small card with the academy's address. "I'll be waiting." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Maria clutching the card in her hand. For the rest of the day, Maria couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. Was this real? Could someone like her truly belong in a place like the Marquez Academy? That night, Maria lay awake under the stars, the card still clutched in her hand. She thought about all the times she had danced in the streets, the fleeting moments of joy and the harsh realities that always followed. She thought about Isabella's words, about the possibility of something more. When morning came, Maria made her decision. She tucked the card into the pocket of her dress and set off toward the address written on it. The streets seemed brighter that day, the noise and chaos fading into the background as she walked with purpose. When she arrived at the academy, Maria's breath caught in her throat. The building was grand, with tall windows and intricate stonework. She hesitated at the door, her nerves threatening to overwhelm her. But then she thought of the music, of the way it made her feel, and she pushed the door open. Inside, the sound of piano music filled the air. Maria followed it to a large studio, where a group of dancers was rehearsing. They moved with precision and grace, their movements perfectly synchronized. Maria watched in awe, her doubts creeping back. She could never be like them. "Maria!" She turned to see Isabella approaching, her smile warm. "I'm glad you came," she said. "Come with me." Isabella led Maria to a smaller studio, where a pianist sat at a gleaming grand piano. The space was empty, save for the polished wooden floor and mirrored walls. "Show me what you can do," Isabella said. Maria hesitated, her heart pounding. She glanced at the pianist, who began to play a soft, melodic tune. Taking a deep breath, Maria stepped onto the floor. At first, her movements were tentative, her nerves threatening to take over. But as the music enveloped her, she began to lose herself in the rhythm. She spun and leapt, her bare feet gliding across the floor with a fluidity that came from years of dancing on the streets. When she finished, the room fell silent. Maria looked at Isabella, her chest heaving. The woman's expression was unreadable, and for a moment, Maria feared she had failed. Then Isabella smiled. "You have a gift," she said simply, "and I'd like to help you hone it." Maria's breath caught in her throat. "Really?" she whispered. "Really," Isabella said. "But it won't be easy. You'll have to work hard, harder than you've ever worked before. Are you ready for that?" Maria nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "I'm ready." Maria's first day at the Marquez Academy of Dance was nothing short of overwhelming. The large, mirrored studio was filled with dancers stretching, practicing pirouettes, and conversing in hushed tones. Their sleek attire and confident movements were a stark contrast to Maria's tattered dress and bare feet. She shrank back instinctively, unsure if she belonged. Isabella noticed her hesitation and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Don't let it intimidate you," she said gently. "Everyone starts somewhere." Maria nodded, her nerves still buzzing. Isabella introduced her to the group, explaining that Maria was here on a special trial. Some of the dancers smiled politely, while others exchanged skeptical glances. Maria felt their eyes on her as she took her place in the back of the room. The first class was grueling. The instructor, a tall man with sharp eyes named Senor Ruiz, called out commands in rapid succession. "Posture, control, precision," he barked as the students moved through a series of exercises at the bar. Maria tried her best to follow along, mimicking the movements of the girl next to her, but her inexperience was obvious. "Higher, Maria. Senor Ruiz called out. Stretch your leg. No, not like that, like this. Maria flushed with embarrassment as the other dancers stifled giggles. She glanced at Isabella, who stood watching from the doorway. Isabella gave her an encouraging nod, silently urging her to keep going. By the end of the class, Maria's muscles ached in ways she hadn't known were possible. Her feet throbbed from the unfamiliar movements, and her pride was bruised from Senor Ruiz's sharp critiques. As the other dancers filed out of the studio, Maria lingered behind, unsure of what to do. Isabella approached her, a small smile on her face. That was a good start, she said. Maria frowned. I wasn't good at all. You weren't perfect, Isabella agreed, but no one expects you to be. What matters is that you didn't give up. That's the first step. Maria nodded, her determination renewed. She would prove herself no matter how hard it was. The days that followed were some of the hardest Maria had ever faced. Each morning, she arrived at the academy before sunrise, practicing the basics over and over again. She struggled with the precision and technique that seemed to come so easily to the other dancers, but she refused to give up. When her classmates snickered at her mistakes, she ignored them. When Senor Ruiz's corrections stung, she pushed herself harder. Her progress was slow but steady. Little by little, Maria began to find her rhythm. Her turns became smoother, her posture stronger, her movements more deliberate. Isabella watched her closely, offering guidance and encouragement at every step. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight streamed through the studio windows, Isabella pulled Maria aside. You've been working hard, she said. But dancing isn't just about technique. It's about expression. It's about telling a story. Maria tilted her head, unsure of what she meant. Show me how you danced on the street, Isabella said. Dance like no one's watching? Maria hesitated. The structured routines of the academy had all but silenced the free-spirited movements she had once loved. But as Isabella's words sank in, Maria closed her eyes and let the music guide her. She began to move, her body flowing with a natural grace that couldn't be taught. She spun and leapt, her movements full of emotion, each step telling a story of resilience and hope. When she opened her eyes, Isabella was smiling. That, Isabella said softly, is what makes you special. Don't lose it. As weeks turned into months, Maria's talent blossomed. She worked tirelessly to master the technical skills required of a professional dancer, all while preserving the raw emotion that set her apart. The other students began to take notice, their initial skepticism giving way to admiration. Even Senor Ruiz, who rarely gave compliments, began to nod approvingly during her performances. But Maria's journey wasn't without its challenges. She struggled to balance her training with the demands of her life on the streets. The academy provided her with a small stipend for food and clothing, but it was barely enough to get by. She often went to bed hungry, her stomach growling as she lay on the hard pavement beneath the stars. One day, as she arrived at the academy with dark circles under her eyes and a tired slump in her shoulders, Isabella pulled her aside. Maria, she said gently, are you getting enough to eat? Maria hesitated, unsure of how to respond. I'm fine, she said finally, avoiding Isabella's gaze. Isabella frowned, unconvinced. You can't dance on an empty stomach. Let me help you? Maria shook her head. You've already done so much for me. I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, Isabella said firmly. You're my student. And taking care of my students is my responsibility. From that day forward, Isabella made sure Maria had everything she needed: food, proper clothing, and even a small room at the academy where she could sleep. For the first time in years, Maria felt truly cared for, and her gratitude only fueled her determination to succeed. The turning point in Maria's journey came when the academy announced its annual showcase, a prestigious event attended by some of the most influential figures in the performing arts world. Each student was required to perform a solo piece, and Maria was no exception. As the showcase approached, Maria threw herself into rehearsals, spending every spare moment perfecting her routine. She chose a piece that blended the technical precision she had learned at the academy with the raw, expressive style that was uniquely hers. It was a risky choice, but Maria knew it was the only way to truly show the judges who she was. The night of the showcase arrived, and the Academy's Grand Theater was filled with an eager audience. Maria waited backstage, her heart pounding as she listened to the applause for the other performers. She clutched the hem of her dress, her nerves threatening to overwhelm her. "You've got this," Isabella said, appearing at her side. "Remember, dance like no one's watching?" Maria nodded, taking a deep breath as her name was announced. She stepped onto the stage, the bright lights blinding her for a moment. The theater was silent, all eyes on her. As the music began, Maria closed her eyes and let it wash over her. She started to move, her body telling a story of struggle and triumph, of heartache and hope. Each step was filled with emotion, her movements fluid and powerful. She spun and leapt with a grace that belied her years, her soul laid bare for all to see. When the music ended, the theater erupted into applause. Maria stood frozen for a moment, her chest heaving as she tried to process what had just happened. Then she bowed, tears streaming down her face as the audience rose to their feet. Backstage, Isabella enveloped Maria in a tight hug. "You were incredible," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." Maria smiled through her tears, her heart full. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, not as a street girl, but as a dancer, an artist, someone with something to offer the world. In the days that followed, Maria's performance became the talk of the town. Influential patrons and critics praised her talent, calling her a rising star with a gift that could not be taught. Offers began to pour in, from scholarships to prestigious dance schools, to invitations to perform on stages around the world. But Maria remained humble, remembering the streets where her journey had begun. She returned to the corner where she had first danced for the crowds, not to beg or survive, but to inspire. With each step, she reminded herself, and others, that even the harshest realities could not silence the music within. The days following Maria's performance at the showcase were a whirlwind. Letters of admiration poured into the Academy, many addressed specifically to her. Wealthy patrons wanted to sponsor her training, and dance companies were extending offers for her to audition for their ensembles. The buzz was intoxicating, but Maria couldn't shake the feeling of disbelief. How had she gone from being a nameless street girl to someone people now called a prodigy? Isabella sat Maria down in her office one morning, the sound of the Academy bustling in the background. "You have many decisions to make," she said, sliding a stack of letters across the desk. "These are opportunities most dancers dream of. But you don't need to rush. Take your time." Maria scanned the letters, her hands trembling slightly. She felt overwhelmed by the sheer volume of offers. One letter caught her eye. It was from the National Ballet of San Espina, the most prestigious company in the country. They wanted her to join their training program, an honor reserved for the best of the best. "Do you think I'm ready?" Maria asked, looking up at Isabella. Isabella smiled gently. "I think you're more than ready," she said. "But the question is, what do you want? You've worked so hard to get here, Maria. This is your moment to choose your path." Maria thought about the long hours she had spent practicing, the sacrifices she had made, and the people who had helped her along the way. She thought about the streets, where her journey had begun, and the small crowd that had once been her only audience. More than anything, she wanted to honor that journey, to prove that where she came from didn't define where she could go. "I want to join the National Ballet," Maria said finally, her voice steady. "But I don't want to leave behind the people who believed in me. I want to give back just like they gave to me." Isabella's eyes softened with pride. "Then let's make it happen," she said. The months that followed were some of the most transformative of Maria's life. She began training with the National Ballet, immersing herself in a world of discipline and artistry that pushed her to her limits. The dancers there were among the most talented she had ever seen, and Maria often felt like she had to work twice as hard to keep up. But she never let her doubts consume her. Instead, she channeled them into her dancing, her movements fueled by the resilience that had carried her through the streets. Her rise in the ballet world was meteoric. Within a year, Maria was chosen to perform in a leading role for the company's production of The Firebird, a tale of transformation and triumph that felt eerily close to her own story. The announcement made headlines, and the anticipation for her performance grew with each passing day. But as the opening night approached, Maria found herself battling a familiar fear. What if she wasn't good enough? What if the audience saw her as an outsider, someone who didn't belong in their world of elegance and refinement? She had come so far, but the ghosts of her past still lingered, whispering doubts into her mind. On the night of the performance, Maria stood backstage, her costume shimmering in the dim light. The theater was packed, the air buzzing with excitement. She could hear the murmurs of the audience, their expectations weighing heavily on her shoulders. Isabella appeared by her side, her presence a calming force. "Nervous?" she asked. Maria nodded, her hands trembling. "What if I fail?" "You won't," Isabella said firmly. "You've already proven yourself, Maria. Remember why you started dancing. It's not about perfection, it's about telling your story." Maria took a deep breath, her thoughts drifting back to the streets where she had first discovered the joy of movement. She thought about the music, the rhythm, the way dancing made her feel alive. She nodded, her resolve strengthening. "I'm ready." The curtain rose, and Maria stepped onto the stage, her heart pounding in time with the music. The spotlight bathed her in a golden glow as she moved with a grace and power that left the audience breathless. Her performance was a masterpiece, a seamless blend of technical brilliance and raw emotion. Each leap, each spin, each gesture told a story of struggle and triumph, of a girl who had defied the odds to follow her dream. When the final note of the music faded, the theater erupted into applause. Maria stood center stage, her chest heaving, as the audience rose to their feet in a thunderous ovation. Tears filled her eyes as she bowed, the magnitude of the moment washing over her. She had done it. She had told her story, and the world had listened. The days after the performance were a blur of interviews, photo shoots, and offers from companies around the globe. Maria's name was now synonymous with brilliance, her talent celebrated as a force of nature. But amid the glamour and acclaim, Maria remained grounded. She knew that her success wasn't hers alone. It belonged to the people who had supported her, from Isabella to the crowds on the street. One morning, Maria returned to the academy, slipping quietly into the familiar studio where her journey had begun. She placed a pair of pointe shoes on the floor, a gift for the next student who would walk through those doors with a dream in their heart. Then she walked to the corner of the room, where Isabella stood watching her with a proud smile. "You've come a long way," Isabella said, her voice filled with emotion. Maria smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you." Isabella shook her head. "You had the talent, Maria. All I did was show you the way." In the years that followed, Maria's career reached new heights. She performed on the world's most prestigious stages, her name shining alongside the greatest dancers of her time. But she never forgot her roots. Between performances, Maria dedicated herself to mentoring young dancers from underprivileged backgrounds, creating opportunities for those who, like her, had once dreamed of a better life. She founded the Maria Foundation for the Arts, a program that provided free dance classes, scholarships, and resources to children in underserved communities. The foundation's motto, "Every story deserves a stage," was a reflection of Maria's belief that art could transform lives. One day, as Maria visited one of the foundation studios, she watched a group of children rehearsing a routine. Their laughter and determination filled the room, reminding her of her own journey. Among them was a young girl with wide eyes and a hesitant smile, her movements tentative but full of promise. Maria approached her, kneeling to meet her gaze. "What's your name?" she asked. "Lucia," the girl said softly. Maria smiled. "You have a gift, Lucia. Don't be afraid to let it shine." The girl's face lit up, her confidence growing under Maria's encouragement. As Maria watched her dance, she felt a sense of fulfillment that no stage or spotlight could match. This was her legacy, not just the applause or the accolades, but the lives she had touched and the dreams she had helped nurture. On the anniversary of her performance in The Firebird, Maria returned to the streets of San Espina, where it had all begun. The bustling city was as lively as ever, the air filled with the sounds of music and laughter. Maria found the corner where she had first danced, the memories flooding back as she stood among the crowd. A musician began to play, the lively notes of an accordion echoing through the street. Without hesitation, Maria stepped into the open, her feet moving to the rhythm. The crowd gathered around her, their expressions a mix of awe and delight as they watched the world-famous dancer perform with the same passion and freedom she had as a child. When the music ended, the crowd erupted into applause, their cheers filling the air. Maria bowed, her heart full. She was no longer the poor orphan girl dancing for survival. She was an artist, a storyteller, a symbol of hope. And as she looked out at the faces of the people who had once been her only audience, she knew that her journey had come full circle. Months after her return to the streets of San Espina, Maria's life was busier than ever. She balanced performances, foundation work, and mentorship with the same discipline and passion she had carried since her earliest days at the Marquez Academy. Her story had become a beacon of hope for people around the world, proof that dreams could survive even in the harshest of realities. Maria was invited to perform at the International Dance Gala in Paris, a prestigious event showcasing the world's top dancers. It was an honor she never could have imagined, and yet it felt like the natural next step in her journey. The theme of the gala was Origins, a celebration of the unique backgrounds that shaped each performer's artistry. As Maria prepared for the event, she reflected on her own origins. Her childhood on the streets, her love for dancing sparked by street performers, her struggles to rise above her circumstances, all of it had shaped who she was. She decided to choreograph a piece that would pay homage to her roots, blending the raw, instinctive movements of her street performances with the refined technique she had developed over the years. The night of the gala, the Grand Theatre in Paris was filled with luminaries from the arts, culture, and media. Maria stood backstage, her costume simple yet elegant, her heart pounding with anticipation. She had performed on countless stages, but this one felt different. This was her chance to share her story with the world in a way that transcended words. When her name was announced, Maria stepped onto the stage, the spotlight following her as she took her position. The music began, a haunting melody played on an accordion, reminiscent of the street corners where her journey had begun. Maria closed her eyes, letting the music guide her, and then she moved. Her performance was a revelation. Each step, each turn, each leap told a story of resilience, hope, and triumph. She danced with the grace of someone who had trained for years and the passion of someone who had lived every moment of her story. The audience was captivated, their eyes glued to her every movement. As the music reached its crescendo, Maria leapt into the air, her body seeming to defy gravity as she hung suspended for a moment before landing with perfect precision. The final note of the music faded, and Maria held her pose, her chest heaving, as the theater erupted into applause. The ovation was deafening, the audience rising to their feet in unison. Maria bowed, tears streaming down her face, as the magnitude of the moment washed over her. She had shared her story, and the world had listened. After the performance, Maria was approached by dancers, choreographers, and patrons who showered her with praise. But it was the words of a young dancer, barely out of her teens, that touched her the most. "You showed me that it's okay to be different," the girl said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've always felt like I didn't belong in this world, but watching you, it gives me hope." Maria smiled, her eyes glistening. "You belong," she said firmly. "Never doubt that. Your story is what makes you unique. Embrace it." The girl nodded, her confidence growing under Maria's encouragement. As Maria watched her walk away, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was why she danced, not just for the applause or the accolades, but for the chance to inspire others to believe in themselves. Back in San Espina, Maria continued to dedicate herself to her foundation. She expanded its reach, opening new studios in underserved communities and providing scholarships to aspiring dancers. One of the foundation's most successful programs was its annual Street Dance Festival, an event that celebrated the artistry and creativity of street performers. The festival quickly became a beloved tradition, drawing performers and spectators from all over the region. It was a vibrant celebration of culture and community, and Maria made it a point to perform at the festival every year. Her appearances were always a highlight, her dances blending the professional polish of her stage performances with the raw energy of her street roots. At one such festival, Maria spotted a young boy performing on the corner, his movements tentative but full of promise. He reminded her of herself at his age, and she couldn't resist the urge to approach him. "You're good," she said, crouching down to his level. "What's your name?" "Raphael," the boy said, his eyes wide with awe. "You're Maria, aren't you?" Maria smiled and nodded. "I used to dance on this very street just like you," she said. "Keep practicing, Raphael. You have something special." The boy beamed, and Maria handed him a flyer for her foundation. "Come by the studio," she said. "We'd love to have you join us." Raphael's eyes lit up, and he nodded eagerly. As Maria walked away, she felt a familiar warmth in her chest. She knew she couldn't change the world, but she could change lives, one dancer at a time. As the years went by, Maria's influence continued to grow. She became a global ambassador for the arts, using her platform to advocate for access to education and opportunities for underserved communities. Her performances were hailed as masterpieces, her choreography blending the traditional and the contemporary, the polished and the raw. But despite her fame, Maria never forgot where she came from. She returned to the streets of San Espina often, not just to perform but to connect with the people who had shaped her journey. She listened to their stories, offered them support, and reminded them that their dreams were valid. One day, as she walked through the bustling marketplace, a familiar melody caught her ear. She turned to see an accordion player performing on the corner. A small crowd gathered around him. Maria smiled, the music stirring memories of her earliest dances. Without hesitation, she stepped into the open space and began to dance. The crowd erupted into cheers as they recognized her, their applause echoing through the street. Maria twirled and leapt with the same passion she had as a child, her movements a celebration of the journey that had brought her here. When the music ended, Maria bowed deeply, her heart full. The crowd surged forward, their faces alight with admiration and gratitude. Maria stayed and talked with them, her connection to her roots as strong as ever. Years later, Maria stood on the stage of the Marquez Academy, addressing a new generation of dancers. Her hair was streaked with silver, but her eyes still sparkled with the same passion that had carried her through her journey. "You all have stories," she said, her voice steady. "Stories that make you who you are. Dance is more than movement. It's a way to share those stories, to connect with others, to inspire. Never forget where you came from, and never stop believing in where you can go." The room erupted into applause, the young dancers rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Maria smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She had come full circle, and now it was her turn to guide others on their journeys. As the applause faded, Maria stepped off the stage and into the crowd, her presence a reminder that dreams, no matter how impossible they may seem, can become reality. And as she moved among the dancers, her steps as light and graceful as ever, Maria knew that her story was far from over. It had only just begun. As Maria stood in the grand auditorium of the Marquez Academy, watching the young dancers rehearse, she was struck by the beauty of their movements. Each leap, spin, and flourish told a unique story, much like her own had all those years ago. But what moved her most was the diversity of the students, children from all walks of life, each carrying their own dreams and struggles, united by their love of dance. The Maria Foundation for the Arts had grown beyond what she had ever imagined. Studios had been established in countries around the world, offering free classes and resources to thousands of aspiring dancers. Maria often traveled to visit these studios, meeting the students and sharing her journey with them. One such visit brought her to a small village in Argentina. The foundation had recently opened a studio there, and Maria was eager to meet the students. When she arrived, she found the studio bustling with activity, children practicing routines, teachers offering guidance, and parents watching with pride. As Maria walked through the studio, she noticed a girl sitting alone in the corner, her knees drawn to her chest. The girl's expression was distant, her eyes filled with uncertainty. Maria approached her, crouching down to meet her gaze. "Hola," Maria said softly. "What's your name?" "Luciana," the girl replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Maria smiled warmly. "It's nice to meet you, Luciana. Do you like to dance?" Luciana hesitated, then nodded. I used to, she said. But I'm not very good. Everyone feels that way at first, Maria said. I used to think the same thing. But you know what I learned? It's not about being perfect. It's about expressing yourself. Dance is your story. No one else can tell it the way you can. Luciana's eyes brightened slightly, and Maria held out her hand. Come on, she said. Let's dance together. Luciana hesitated, then took Maria's hand. They moved to the center of the studio where the other students paused to watch. Maria began with a simple step, her movements light and inviting. Slowly, Luciana followed, her steps timid at first but growing more confident with each beat. By the end of the song, Luciana was smiling, her movements free and full of life. The other students cheered, and Maria hugged her tightly. You're a natural, she said. Never stop dancing. Maria's travels brought her into contact with countless young dancers like Luciana, each with their own struggles and triumphs. She poured her heart into her work, knowing that every child she inspired was a step toward building a world where art and self-expression were accessible to all. But as much as she loved her foundation, Maria missed the stage. It had been years since her last major performance, and while she had no regrets about dedicating herself to mentorship, a part of her longed to dance for an audience once more. One day, Maria received a letter from the director of the National Ballet. The company was planning a special performance to celebrate its 50th anniversary, and they wanted Maria to choreograph and star in the centerpiece, a tribute to the transformative power of dance. Maria was both honored and apprehensive. It had been so long since she had performed at that level, and she worried that time had dulled her abilities. But Isabella, ever her guiding light, encouraged her to take the leap. This is your chance to remind the world of your brilliance, Isabella said. And to remind yourself. The months leading up to the performance were intense. Maria worked tirelessly, pouring her soul into the choreography. She drew inspiration from her journey, blending the raw energy of her street performances with the refined elegance of her professional training. The piece was a celebration of resilience, a testament to the power of art to transcend boundaries and unite people. The night of the performance, the theater was packed with an audience that included dignitaries, celebrities, and Maria's family and friends. As she stood backstage, adjusting her costume, she felt a familiar mix of nerves and excitement. She glanced at Isabella, who gave her a reassuring nod. You've got this, Isabella said. Just dance from your heart. The curtain rose, and Maria stepped onto the stage, the spotlight casting a golden glow around her. The music began, a haunting melody played on an accordion, a nod to her origins. Maria moved with a grace that belied her years, her body telling a story of struggle, triumph, and transformation. The audience was mesmerized, their eyes glued to her every movement. Each step, each spin, each leap was a testament to her journey, a journey that had taken her from the streets of San Espina to the world's most prestigious stages. When the performance ended, the theater erupted into applause. Maria stood center stage, her chest heaving, as the audience rose to their feet in a thunderous ovation. Tears streamed down her face as she bowed, the magnitude of the moment washing over her. The performance was hailed as a masterpiece, and Maria was lauded as a legend. But for Maria, the greatest reward was the letters and messages she received in the days that followed. People from all walks of life wrote to her, sharing how her performance had moved them, inspired them, and reminded them of the beauty and resilience of the human spirit. Among the letters was one from Luciana, the girl Maria had danced with in Argentina. Thank you for believing in me, Luciana wrote. Because of you, I believe in myself. Maria smiled as she read the letter, her heart full. She had spent her life dancing to tell her story, but now she realized that her greatest gift was helping others find the courage to tell theirs. In the years that followed, Maria continued to inspire. She wrote another book, The Dance Within, a journey of resilience and hope, which became an international bestseller. She established a network of dance festivals that celebrated diverse styles and cultures, fostering a sense of unity and appreciation for the art form. But no matter how far she traveled or how many accolades she received, Maria always returned to the streets of San Espina. It was there, among the bustling crowds and the music of the city, that she felt most at home. One day, as she walked through the marketplace, she heard a familiar tune. Turning, she saw a group of children dancing in a circle, their movements lively and full of joy. Maria watched them, a smile spreading across her face. Without hesitation, she joined them, her steps light and graceful. The children laughed and clapped, their energy infectious. For Maria, it was a reminder that the true essence of dance wasn't found on a stage or in a spotlight. It was found in the connections it created, the joy it brought, and the stories it told. As the sun set over San Espina, Maria danced with the children, her laughter mingling with theirs. She had come full circle, but her journey was far from over. The world was her stage, and she was determined to keep dancing, keep inspiring, and keep sharing the music that lived within her. Years passed, and Maria's name became synonymous with inspiration. From the streets of San Espina to the world's grandest stages, her journey resonated with people across generations. Maria was no longer just a dancer, she was a symbol of hope, of perseverance, and of the boundless possibilities that art could create. Maria had just turned 45 when she was approached by the global organization Artists Without Borders. They wanted her to spearhead a worldwide initiative to bring arts education to the most impoverished and war-torn areas of the world. The idea thrilled her, but she hesitated. Her life was already so full, her foundation, her mentorships, her performances. Could she take on such a monumental responsibility? As she sat in her modest home one evening, surrounded by letters from students and fans, she found one letter that stood out. It was from Raphael, the boy she had met at the street dance festival years ago. Now a young man, Raphael was performing on stages in his home country of Colombia and mentoring other young dancers from disadvantaged backgrounds. "You showed me what was possible," he wrote. "Because of you, I've made it my mission to pass that hope on to others. Thank you for believing in me." Maria felt tears well up as she read his words. This was why she danced. Not for the applause or the accolades, but for the lives she had touched and the ripple effect she had created. The letter renewed her resolve, and the next day, she accepted Artists Without Borders' offer. The new initiative, called Art Beyond Borders, became Maria's passion project. She traveled to refugee camps, remote villages, and conflict zones, bringing dance and art to children who had known nothing but hardship. In each place she visited, she saw the transformative power of creativity, the way it lifted spirits, built confidence, and provided an outlet for emotions too deep for words. In a small camp on the outskirts of Syria, Maria met Amina, a young girl who had lost her family in the conflict. Amina was withdrawn, her eyes filled with a sadness that seemed far too heavy for her 10 years. Maria spent days working with the children in the camp, teaching them basic dance movements and encouraging them to express themselves through motion. At first, Amina sat on the sidelines watching silently. But on the 5th day, something changed. As Maria danced, spinning and leaping with a freedom that seemed to defy the weight of the world, Amina stood up. Slowly, hesitantly, she began to mimic Maria's movements. Her steps were tentative, her arms stiff, but there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Maria extended her hand, and Amina took it. Together, they danced, their movements becoming more fluid with each passing moment. The other children clapped and cheered, and for the first time, Amina smiled, a radiant, unguarded smile that lit up the entire room. "That's the power of dance," Maria told the camp's leaders later. "It doesn't just heal the body, it heals the soul." As Art Beyond Borders grew, so did Maria's influence. Her work brought her into contact with world leaders, philanthropists, and activists who supported her mission to make the arts accessible to all. But despite her global success, Maria remained deeply connected to her roots. She continued to return to San Espina, where her journey had begun, to mentor young dancers and participate in the annual street dance festival. One year, as she performed at the festival, Maria noticed an older woman in the crowd watching her with tears in her eyes. After the performance, the woman approached her. "Do you remember me?" the woman asked, her voice trembling. Maria studied her face, and a memory surfaced, faint but clear. "You were there," Maria said slowly. "The day I first danced on the street. You clapped for me." The woman nodded, smiling through her tears. "I knew you had something special," she said. "I just didn't know how far you would go." Maria hugged her tightly, overwhelmed by the connection. "Thank you," she said, "for believing in me when I didn't even believe in myself." As Maria's life unfolded, she began to reflect more deeply on the legacy she wanted to leave behind. She decided to write a third book, a memoir that would chronicle her journey from the streets of San Espina to the global stage. Titled Steps of the Heart, the book was both a personal narrative and a call to action, urging readers to embrace their passions and support the arts as a force for change. The memoir became a bestseller, earning critical acclaim for its honesty and emotional depth. Readers praised Maria's ability to weave her personal story with larger themes of resilience, hope, and the transformative power of art. The book inspired countless people to pursue their own creative paths and to see the arts as an essential part of humanity. In her late 50s, Maria faced a new challenge. The physical toll of years of dancing had begun to catch up with her. Persistent pain in her knees and back made performing increasingly difficult, and her doctors advised her to scale back her physical activity. The thought of stepping away from the stage was bittersweet, but Maria knew it was time. Her final performance was held at the Marquez Academy, where her journey as a professional dancer had begun. The theater was filled with friends, family, former students, and supporters from around the world. As Maria took the stage, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her. This wasn't just an ending. It was a celebration of everything she had accomplished and everyone who had been part of her journey. She performed a piece she had choreographed herself, one that blended the styles and influences that had shaped her life. The raw energy of her street performances, the precision of her ballet training, the cultural elements she had embraced through her travels, it was all there, woven together in a dance that told the story of her life. When the performance ended, the audience erupted into applause, rising to their feet in a tribute that seemed to shake the very walls of the theater. Maria stood in the center of the stage, tears streaming down her face as she bowed deeply. It was a moment she would carry with her forever. Though she retired from performing, Maria's work continued. She expanded her foundation, established new programs for underserved communities, and remained a mentor to countless young dancers. She also became a sought-after speaker, traveling the world to share her story and advocate for the arts. In her 70s, Maria returned to San Espino one last time for the Street Dance Festival. Though her body no longer allowed her to perform, she stood among the crowd, cheering for the dancers who had taken her place. One young boy, no older than 8, caught her eye with his spirited movements and infectious energy. After his performance, Maria approached him. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice warm. "Diego," he replied, grinning up at her. Maria smiled, seeing a spark of her younger self in his eyes. "Diego, you have a gift," she said. "Never stop dancing." Diego beamed, and Maria felt a deep sense of peace. She had come full circle, her story now part of a larger tapestry of hope and inspiration. As she walked away, the music of the festival filled the air, a reminder that the rhythm of life never truly stopped. In her final years, Maria remained a beloved figure in the world of dance and beyond. Her legacy was carried on by the students she had mentored, the lives she had touched, and the stories she had inspired. And though she was no longer on the stage, her spirit continued to dance. In every movement, every melody, and every heart that believed in the power of dreams. Maria's life was a testament to the idea that art could change the world, not through grand gestures, but through the small, meaningful connections that brought people together. And as the sun set over San Espina, her story lived on, a light that would never fade.